Before we get ready to crumble on today's Claytastic episode, I'd like to give a shout out to Dawn of the Monsters and its new DLC update, which packs a ton of new content into an already stellar co-op kaiju brawler. The free update adds unique challenges via Trials mode, extra difficult New Game Plus levels, the shiny new Story Plus option, and full Japanese voice acting for that authentic tokusatsu experience. The premium portion of this update, the Arcade Plus Character DLC pack, goes for $6.99 and brings forth Meteor Temujin, a new 60,000-ton warrior with 3 interchangeable weapons and a whole lot of power. Purchasing this playable mecha also unlocks Arcade Mode, an old-school challenge with selectable or random buffs, a dedicated leaderboard to become a legend on, and also includes new unlockable concept art, archive files, and skins for the rest of the cast. The Dawn of the Monsters free update and the Arcade Plus Character DLC pack has just stomped onto PS4, PS5, Xbox One, Xbox Series S and X, Switch, and of course Steam, and is a building smashing good time, as you can see me put it through its paces in this video here. Thanks to WayForward and 13am Games for sponsoring today's video. Without further ado, let's start the show. Welcome back, Warriors, to another episode of The Worst Fighting Game, my endless campaign of combat where I seek to dethrone the current king of the crap, which shall remain nameless.
I have seen the amateur.
No! Okay, well, yes, Expect No Mercy is currently on a 6-match winning streak, but truth be told, I think I've been going about this the wrong way. If I'm seeking to find something that's worse, it shouldn't be the same familiar digitized dreck, but instead something that's both unexpected and unhinged. And really, in the realm of fighting games, few things are as unhinged as the slapstick button basher that was always more concerned with making fart jokes over compelling mechanics. This is no better exemplified than with 1998's Clayfighter 63 1/3, the cleverly titled second sequel in the series, which, while having a fair bit of hype leading into its launch, splattered onto store shelves with a wet thud, along with an absolutely frosty critical reception. Will this wacky assortment of snowmen, blobs, and racial stereotypes be enough to Claytality Expect No Mercy? Well, we won't know for sure until we get it in the ring. First announced in 1995 for the Panasonic M2, Clayfighter Battle for Claymoto Island, Clayfighter Extreme was almost immediately canceled and then brought over to the end. You know what? I already covered all this shit in my dedicated What Happened episode on Clayfighter, so go check that out, starting at 7:55 to get the skinny as to how Bad Mr. Frosty, Taffy, and the rest bumbled their way onto the 5th generation of console hardware. Are you done watching yet? Because I'm not recapping it. I'm seriously not. I'm just jumping ahead. Wait, what? You think I won't do that? Clayfighter 63 1/3 splorched onto the N64 October 21st, 1998 in North America and November 1st in Europe. And sadly, Japan never got this magnum opus, which is a shame, because I'd love to see Tokido and Kakeru have a 1st to 10 in this one. Regardless, most magazines and websites were happy to slap Clayfighter with 2s and 3s, with the very few positive impressions coming from both Nintendo Power, oh my god, I'm so shocked, and Game Fan magazine for some reason. They praised the humor and the accessible gameplay, while many others criticized the tiny amount of fighters, blurry sprites, choppy animation, and very few game modes. Which, spoilers, is all stuff I'm gonna criticize too. I have to recognize, however, that 63 1/3 does have a cult following, because it's just so over the top and has that so bad that it's good style energy that has drawn people into its soggy, clayey aura. And, well, that about recaps the history portion of this video. See, I told you it's gonna be short. I wasn't fucking around, but with that out of the way, it's the perfect time to move on to the... So I can tell you this for free, Clayfighter 63 and a third is an ugly, ugly game. I mean, just look at it.
Look at it! It's ugly, isn't it? You look at it!
While the Clayfighter team at Interplay went back to using the same stop-motion animation studio that worked on the first entry and not the second, it produced really mixed results here. The N64 was not built with this type of thing in mind, so 2D animation data was a rare commodity, and I honestly think this animates worse than the first two games. The clay models themselves do look pretty awesome, with a crazier, more macabre vibe to many of the returning Clayfighters, but when you combine that with the dark, simplistic 3D backgrounds, you get this sleazy, blurry, smeary sort of visual identity that to me is way less appealing than the saturated, cartoony look the series once had. I get how it was the team's first attempt at 3D here, but oftentimes you can't even tell what you're looking at, as these textures, even by N64 standards, look rougher than a badger's ass. Following that, the menus and UI are also a very no-frills affair, with this blasé design that, I don't know, just doesn't play into the wacky world all that well. Fortunately, Clayfighter does excel in one area of the presentation, and that's the audio, or the sound effects more accurately. Gonna be honest, the only thing I have to say about the game's music has started and concluded with this very sentence. I was just playing the game right before starting this script, and I legitimately don't remember anything about the soundtrack. However, the splats, punchy hit impacts, explosions, and of course the farts are all of the high fidelity you'd come to expect.
Smell this action!
Interplay, shelling out for Michael Buffer as the ring announcer, does a lot to add to the proceedings as well.
Let's get ready to rumble! Let's get ready to crumble!
As he gives his full gusto to all the KI-esque combo callouts.
That was brilliant! Ouch, ouch, ouch! Little girly combo! Oh, that's gonna leave a mark!
But really, it's the accomplished troupe of voice actors that does the heavy lifting for not just the presentation, but for the entire game. Dan Castellaneta reprising his role as
Earthworm Jim!
as well as Frank Welker and Rob Paulson as a whole bunch of others. The Clayfighters are also literally unable to shut up during a fight, throwing out all kinds of one-liners with at least one or two eliciting a smile at worst or a sensible chuckle at best. Except of course for Kung Pao Enter the Fist here. Even back in the 90s, I remember first seeing / hearing this guy and thinking, oh man, that's not cool. And speaking of the 90s, if you bought or rented this back in the day and didn't bother to look at the instruction manual, you'd have no idea what the hell was going on. There's this weird, ugly 3D island, a bunch of new characters, and that's it. There's nothing, not even a quick text crawl that explains the story, and when you actually do earn a character's ending, yes, endings confirmed, you'd have likely been even more confused. What's worse is that the endings are, let's be honest, pretty shitty. Your character just flails around on the left there with text slowly scrolling on the right, and yeah, that's it. Overall, it's a pretty uneven presentation. I think if the backgrounds had been kept 2D and they released this on hardware with more storage space like the PlayStation or Saturn or hell, the Dreamcast the following year, we could have gotten something that didn't look like, well, this. Oh, but my little Clayites, we've only just begun, because now it's time to break down the... I usually fold what modes are available in this section as well, and that's what I'm gonna do here. There are no modes. I mean, there's options and then simply begin game, which brings you directly to the arcade mode, and if a second player presses start here, the verses will kick in, I think. But yeah, that's the modes. Clayfighter 63 and a third, Killer Instinct, which you try to ape really hard here, had a full-fledged training mode, tournament, and team options back in 1996, so what's the excuse to not include at least one of those? What's more is that there's actual shit in 63 and a third, like combos, supers, parries, so it's even more egregious there's no way to properly lab any of it. You know, for the two people in the world that would lab this. It's just really shocking that a fighting game released in 1998, late 1998 mind you, literally has one mode in which to fight. I mean, hell, even Judgment Clay at least had a tournament option. As the reviews lamented, the base roster is also pretty limited, with Bad Mr. Frosty, Taffy, Ichabod Clay, Blob, T-Hoppy, and Bonker all returning from the previous games. In terms of new blood, or Clay, 63 and a third adds Hungun, Kung Pao, Jim, and 3 unlockables, Sumo Santa, Boogerman, and Dr. Kiln. Now, I get locking Kiln, he was mentioned in the last game and acts as the boss here, but why the other two? Like, why would you hide the king of the boogers? Having a base roster of 9, which was only one more than Street Fighter 2, was pretty stingy in 98, and I'm sure it didn't make for a good first impression whenever anybody booted this up. What actually does make for a good first impression, though, shockingly, is the gameplay. Sorta. Moves are done with both taps and motions, and within seconds you start discovering super moves, which come in the form of big auto combos, projectiles, anti-airs, all types of stuff. You also build meter incredibly fast in 63 and a third, maybe even too fast, as matches soon devolve into a flurry of supers hitting and or whiffing. The combo system, which is modeled very, very closely on Killer Instinct, is also pretty forgiving. Things that shouldn't work, do. Moves that shouldn't hit. It's actually kind of fun. This is due in part to the fact that every time a super is triggered, there's always this slow-mo moment and accompanying sound effect, which can lead to some pretty hype moments.
Dumb combo! Weak combo.
There's also Claytalities, but they're all pretty lame, insane combos, which are essentially ultras, combo breakers, and even parrying, which is done exactly like Street Fighter 3 by tapping forward on any hit impact. It's nice these things are in there, but they don't really gel together to make any sort of cohesive feeling fighting system, because it all boils down to using as many supers as you can to wipe out your opponent, as it's the quickest way to victory. This is because everyone has too much damn health. You can confirm like 3 supers in a row and it'll barely bring your opponent down to 50%, and there's no way to change that, by the way, not even in the options. You can thankfully turn off breakthroughs or stage transitions because, well, these awkward animations where your opponent slowly slides towards a door and the screen fades out and then back into a different level only serves to disrupt the flow of the match. While this type of thing was in a few 2D games before this, I think this marks the first time it was implemented in a 3D fighter, predating DOA 2 by a good year. Although, I think DOA pulled them off a little better. So, with all that said, here's the thing. It's actually fairly fun to go around the roster and chain into everyone's super bullshit. The problem comes with the fact that's all 63 and a third has to offer. The gameplay doesn't get more complicated or nuanced than that, but then again, I'm not sure what I should be expecting out of fucking Clayfighter of all things. The team that created this series was always more concerned with poking fun at the genre rather than pushing it forward, so I can't be all that mad over this. What I can get mad over, however, is the... Much like soggy clay itself, 63 1/3 is pretty sluggish all around, which is a direct result of the choppy animation, slowdown due to all the spillets which spew out of every character's every orifice, and the game just not being very well optimized. It's not dreadful, mind you, and I've played a lot worse in this regard, but it doesn't do the game any favors, even when it desperately needs some. If there were speed settings, like the previous Clayfighters had, it probably would have helped relieve the plotting pace. There's certainly something to salvage here though, as 63 1/3 feels really close to being okay, but just misses that mark. I know I mentioned this before, but I still can't help but wonder how this might have worked on the Saturn or Dreamcast, or if the entire game was done on the N64, but with 3D models. But on second thought, that would defeat the purpose of, clay fighting, so I digress. Anyway, the game feel ain't great. We should move on, but before we do, there's one last piece of business I need to mention. The Sculptor's Cut! This blockbuster exclusive special edition adds in characters that were left out of the first version, including Lockjaw Pooch, the Zappa Yow Yow Boys, High Five, and Lady Liberty. R.I.P. to Hobocop. To save space so they could squeeze these last Clayfighters in, Interplay went through the main cast and reduced their overall animation frame count even further. Some special moves and claytalities were also deleted, but the worst of all was the complete removal of the insane combos, a mechanic literally meant to parody KI, which was kind of their whole brand. The crazy combo system was also replaced with something far more basic and stripped down, and I don't know, it just immediately feels less fun, so you might as well just ignore this cartoonish new intro that promises more fun, cause it's just lying to you.
Clayfighter! 1-to-1 they set the stage! Clayfighter! Pounding clay is all the rage! That may have been all to the tale, but Dr. Kiln planned to prevail and re-release the meteor's goo and set more fighters on the loose.
The select screen is nicer, I guess, and each character's end boss is now their rival instead of always Dr. Kiln, but yeah, overall, despite the added fighters, I think this is the inferior version, but you might disagree. If you're a physical fiend though, it is also the most rare and expensive version, by a lot. It's estimated that only 15 to 20,000 copies of Sculptor's Cut were ever manufactured, so if you want a complete version in box, expect to spend a cool $3,000, or $300 for just the cart. Jesus, I mean, who pays $300 for a bad fighting game?
It's me. Hi, I'm the problem, it's me.
Whew, okay, so with all the clay out on the table, where does 63 1/3 and fuck it, Sculptor's Cut land on our tier list of terribleness? It's strong in terms of presentation with its sound effects and voice acting, but not so much graphics. And while the gameplay becomes simplistic, it is fun for a spell. But the paltry selection of modes, sluggish feel, and limited roster can't be ignored either. While they're almost identical in a lot of ways, I am going to score both versions separately, and 63 1/3 is really straddling the line here, with Boogerman's toxic gases almost pushing it into the always overstuffed, fairly stinky tier. But I think its wacky gameplay and combo system barely keep it out of there. So, I declare that all 63 1/3 bits of Clayfighter are just fine. And as much as I love Tress MacNeille as Lady Liberty, I think Sculptor's Cut is a tiny step back when it comes to gameplay, so yeah, you sit there with all the other losers in the stink club, and you think about what you did. I can totally see why both these games were rated harshly on consoles back in the day though. Franchises like Tekken and Virtua Fighter were highly lauded by the press, so switching over to something like Clayfighter, whose main draw was always fighting games are kinda dumb, was wearing pretty thin by the third time around. Still though, going back to it for this review, I was expecting something far worse, and was surprised it didn't age nearly as bad as I had assumed it would. Well, yeah, except for that part. So, expect no mercy, I was wrong. These Claytastic warriors didn't have the gooey guts to dethrone ya, so your legacy lives on for another day.
I have
seen the amateur.
It is you!
Yeah. And if you out there would like to nominate any other future contenders to take on our reigning champion, let me know in the comments below or on any of the socials that you see now on your screen. And until then, Warriors, I'll see you next time on the worst fighting game.